A lot has been said about this election, but perhaps you do not want to engage in sociological analysis as to why the US voted again for someone that they saw in office once and yet decided to re-elect him. How will this affect our relationship with the US? What will the geopolitical implications be? Because they will be far-reaching. The US voters have taken a decision, and that will have a bearing on global developments. Indeed, those effects will last through to the generation of our grandchildren. So what will those implications be? We are here speculating. It is not the first time that a politician has made promises to be elected and done something else once in office. And so I cannot speculate as to what action President Trump will take. All I can say is that we must be prepared for what might happen. We should be calm, vigilant. We should not give the impression that we are paralyzed, caught like a deer in the headlights of a car. We need to show that we are not frightened. I'm sure that we are fearful, in truth. In any case, there will be far-reaching consequences for our bilateral relationship. Trump has threatened to impose customs tariffs to the tune of 10%. If he saw through that pledge, that would have an impact on our economies. He's talked about 60% tariffs on all Chinese products. That will have an impact on global markets. The Chinese goods that cannot access the US market may flood our markets. And what about migration policy? There are moral and humanitarian issues that arise here. And what about interest rates levied by the US Federal Reserve? What sort of economic implications might that have? But I'm here to talk about geopolitics, not the economy. And there are three key issues we should focus on in this debate. And I will follow discussions with great interest. It may be my final debate in the Parliament. First point, we need to look to see what will happen in Ukraine. Secondly, the environment. And third point, relationship with China and Taiwan. And there are three key words here: security, trade, and technology. I will focus on the first issue, security. That really is a core issue for my portfolio, security and defence. So when talking about security, I would like to focus all our attention on Ukraine. I visited Kiev, military centres, various factories, regions where Russia has wreaked havoc and terror. I spoke to Ukrainians, soldiers, President Zelensky. Of course, they are concerned by the decisions that may be taken by the incoming US administration. They asked what our reaction might be if, as Trump said during the election campaign, he attaches conditions to any aid provided to Ukraine as of January. I believe that the European response has to be to stand by our pledges to Ukraine, to its people. We need to continue to offer the support they need to defend themselves. We need to look at US and European support to Ukraine. We actually provide more support to Ukraine if you look at all types of support across the board. But it is true the US supplies more military aid, 25% more than Europe does. If we were to fill in for the US, that would require huge industrial and financial effort, and that would raise a number of questions that we have discussed. What do we do with frozen Russian assets, for example? Do we use these funds to finance the Ukrainian defence industry? That would not suffice. We need to tackle unresolved issues here. To look to see what we do with the assets and not just any income arising from those frozen assets. We need to look at what might happen next. We cannot have a diplomatic agreement that sidelines Europe or Ukraine, deal between Russia and the US. That is something that Ukraine would reject, and we should reject that. No one should decide anything without the participation of Ukraine, which has paid the highest price possible for this war. Of course, we need action as swiftly as possible. We want to see an end to this war as quickly as possible. But how it ends matters. Perhaps for some people, they don't care. Perhaps they just want to see an end to this war and they don't care how it is resolved. But I think it does matter. We need a fair and sustainable resolution. This brings me on to another point, and I would like to take this opportunity to share the following with you. Trump's re-election should make it clear to us that we need to bolster our security. We need to take our own destiny in our own hands. This was something we talked about in 2016 when Trump was first elected, that we needed to take control of our own future. We're saying the same thing today. What has happened, though, over the last 7 years? Military spending in Germany was 1.15% of GDP. It's risen to 1.3%. You can't really say that that is commensurate with taking control of our own fate. Let me tell you something. The European Union is not an economic union, or it is not only an economic union. It is not enough to say, well, NATO is there to protect our security, and then the EU is there to deal with economic matters. That is not enough. The EU must show ambition and craft a common security and defence policy. We need to look at military defence. We shouldn't just produce weapons and arms for NATO. We need the strategic compass. We've done a lot over the last 5 years to ensure that the European Union plays a military role, not a role that would be incompatible with NATO membership, something that would complement NATO membership. We cannot have NATO responsible only for security and we produce the weapons. We need to do more. We have the strategic compass and we need to continue to build on it in the next term.
And yes, some things will change. No doubt the U.S. administration, the incoming one, will not have the same focus as President Biden and Secretary of State, my friend, and then there could be less security for the Palestinians. And specifically when we see with China, there will be trade issues and a much more belligerent approach when it comes to the big technological and trade issues, but I won't go into those even more, and I wish you all of the best.
Thank you very much to the High Representative, Mr. Borrell. The next speaker on our list, on behalf of the EPP, is Mr. Halicki.
Szanowni Państwo.
Ladies and gentlemen, the results of American elections hasn't given us anything new. There is nothing that we wouldn't know already, because on our continent we have a real war and we have the threat from the same directions. Our citizens need our activity, our actions, and consistency when it comes to building security. It is high time we did all this faster and swifter, because the Transatlantic Alliance is a very important element of the security structure, but not the only one. Therefore, we need the European support. We need to support governmental projects, for example, the Polish project of the Eastern Shield, i.e., making our border stronger. Our borders must be safe. Our airspace must be protected. And the idea of the European cupola, of the dome in Europe, presented by our Prime Minister, must be implemented in the name of the joint security. We must find money and means to start and to launch our good functioning arm industry, weapons industry. We need a political decision. Europeans must feel safe, and we are responsible for that. And I'm happy that we'll have a new commissioner on security, our colleague Kubilus, will be very active. I'm sure about that. Thank you.
The next speaker is Yanis Maniatis for SND.
My dear colleagues, the election of Donald Trump is certain that will influence decisively the international relations. If his first term of office in the White House gave a taste for the second term of office, then we have to prepare for a Euro-Atlantic relationship which probably will not be at all calm. He doesn't take into account the multilateral organizations like United Nations, the international law. He abandons the green transition, the new trade war probably that will take place between the European Union and the United States, cutting down the aid towards Ukraine and distancing from alliances such as NATO are various challenges that we will have to face. The Union will be able to be autonomous in the international landscape, shouldn't hesitate to take measures to protect its economy, its industrial base, and finally, its social cohesion. It should be able to defend its borders from any threat and from any revisionist force. Europe should become autonomous strategically at last. Thank you.
The next speaker for PFE is Jordan Bardella.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Mr. Borrell, on the 5th of November, Donald Trump was elected the 47th President of the United States. Through his patriotism, Donald Trump embodies the promise to defend the United States until his death. And it's the first thing that we need to learn from the American elections is that Europe needs to be about defending nations and their interests. Europe runs the risk of falling behind the United States. The GDP of France per capita is the same as the poorest state in the USA, Mississippi. The USA plans to protect itself against unfair competition, to believe in entrepreneurs and companies by reducing standards and regulations. And green ideology reigns in our Parliament and the Commission, but is spoiling our assets and is hindering us. Now, to summarise the situation, the USA is protecting itself, and Europe is not doing that. The United States are innovating, and Europe is putting in place regulation. The USA has Elon Musk, and Europe has Thierry Breton. We need to have a revolution in European mentality, and it needs to be done quickly by basing this on national identities, supporting nuclear energy, innovation companies, respecting the past and belief in the future. We have no other choice. We need to wake up, otherwise we will disappear. Thank you.
The next speaker on our list is Valerie Haya. Nicola Procaccini from ECR. Sorry.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. The results of the U.S. elections will not change the relations between the EU and the U.S. We have a cultural, historical blood link that cannot be trampled on by anyone. The EU elections will not damage relations with the EU, but they have blown up that Brussels bubble. We're not used to celebrating elections of others, and yet the frustration of the European left should be celebrated. It would be worthy of that. High Representative Borrell, I hope that your sad tone is because of the previous debate and not the one that we're having right now. My feeling is that you were not expecting Donald Trump's victory, and you are not able to understand how it could happen because the European left doesn't know any of those people that voted for him. Those ladies and gentlemen, those women and men, you do not know about the Rust Belt workers, the blue-collar workers that fall down and stand back again. You don't know the farmers of the rural areas, the families that are terrified of devastated cities, devastated by drugs and illegal immigration. You know, journalists from CNN, academics from Columbia, and all of those celebrities, none of them voted for Trump. You know, the truth is that people are always wise, and the left here in Europe doesn't know how to understand that on either side of the pond. And we should look at this without prejudice, political prejudice. We know that the U.S. is much more stable historically compared to Europe. Let us do our bit, strengthening the column of NATO, not hold back the economy from with the ideological excesses of the past. A Republican conservative has won in the U.S. because the veritable revolution today is to conserve and not to destroy, wherever in the world that may be, including in Europe.
Now the next speaker is Valerie Haya for Renew. Please, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, honourable members. On the 5th of November, the US voters held their country's fate in their hands. Their decision also affected Europe. The Washington political line will become that of Mar-a-Lago, Trump and Musk. So it is down to us to defend Europe's interests, our defence sovereignty, our economic and trade interests. Europe must be able to defend Europe. Once Donald Trump becomes president, we will see aid to Ukraine dry up. This is a war being led on our doorstep by Putin. We need to redouble our efforts. Our own security is at stake. We need to earmark sufficient resources to this end. State spending on the military is insufficient and the defence market is too fragmented. We have 17 different European tanks, just a single one in the US. We invest 3 times less than the US in defence. That is the total for 27 member states. So we need to look at defence strategy. Responsibility lies with us. We are also failing on competitiveness. We've taken the right steps, but we need to pick up the pace. We need to be more daring, as suggested in Mario Draghi's report. That was an alarm bell to get Europe to wake up. We need a genuinely European industrial strategy to allow our startups to build their businesses here. We need access to critical raw materials, leading cutting-edge technologies. On green technology, artificial intelligence, we need to do more. We are lagging behind measures such as the US IRA. We need urgent action, and we are counting on your successors, Mr. Borrell. Honourable members, European interests lie in fair trading policies for our SMEs, our farmers and our jobs. We must defend multilateralism, of course, but we should also defend our European interests. Donald Trump has set the tone for months. The incoming president has shown unprecedentedly aggressive trade policies, and so we need to look at the measures we have taken against unfair restrictive measures, closed markets and subsidies allocated to our competitors. We have a market of some 500 million. We need to flex our muscle, show that we are a trade and economic powerhouse. We know that Europe's interest is to act together so that we are all the stronger for it. Thank you.
The next speaker on our list is Terry Reinke for the Greens. Please go ahead.
President, dear colleagues, the morning after the US election, Europe woke up in a new world. And let me say it straight away. I do not welcome the election of Donald Trump as US president, nor do I congratulate a person who will do massive damage not only to the citizens in the US, but across the world and also in Europe. And actually, there was a lot of jubilation on the far right side when Trump was elected. And honestly, I ask myself, do you even know what damage this man is going to bring to the European Union, also the citizens that you are going to represent? As far as the announcements of a liar can be trusted, Donald Trump's policies are going to bring a very hard time to Europe. But just because he poses aggressively, it doesn't mean that he can scare us. With a strong European Union, we will be stronger than propaganda and lies. So let's work together as Europeans to invest massively in the future of European industry, for European competitiveness, domestic jobs and European independence from autocrats. Let's work together as Europeans to stay strong in our fight against climate change and its destructive consequences, as we currently see in Spain, for the benefit of our common future here in Europe and this planet. Let's work together as Europeans to strive for peace in the Middle East and also for the people in Ukraine who defend our freedom against a brutal aggressor, for all those who are suffering there, but also for European security and freedom in Europe. Let's work together as Europeans here, and let's enhance the cooperation with our dear friends in the US in our common fight for women's rights, democracy and human dignity. We send them our full solidarity. We know how difficult it must be right now, but be assured the large majority of European citizens and the European Parliament stands by your side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. As we have already a huge number of applicants for the Catch the Eye, I will close the Catch the Eye now. And now I will give the floor to Martin Schirdewan for the left for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam President. One of the biggest democracies in the world and the biggest economic and military power in the world will be governed for the next 4 years by an avowed anti-democrat and a convicted felon. Billionaires dominate media, the economy and politics in the USA, and before our eyes an oligarchy is emerging. He wants to reorganize the state, the political control of the judiciary, and constant disparagement of political competitors. Trump and his best mate Elon Musk spread fake news on Twitter, conspiracy theories and racist and sexist opinions. Elon Musk is a fool, and I believe that X should be put into public ownership. Trump's America First protectionism and the customs tariffs which are due to be imposed put hundreds of thousands of jobs in the EU at risk. And only one answer makes sense: a single European industrial policy which secures jobs and makes our industry fit for the future. In the time of global crises and wars, the EU must strengthen its role at the United Nations, because Trump's election is bad news for climate protection, for the protection of human rights, and for just peace order. Wars in Ukraine and the Middle East require diplomacy. But they don't need somebody who prefers to play golf with Putin than negotiating just peace. And the best response to the election of Donald Trump is a shift in social policy in the European Union. The Commission and Mr. Borrell have for too long has had his head in the sand and has ignored the USA reality. The EU is not prepared for Trump. We need investment in the future, in good jobs and in stronger public services. And this is how we can conquer new fascism. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Folgin.
Уважаеми колеги,
Dear colleagues, Donald Trump being elected as US President gives a unique chance to Europe again to become a key geopolitical player. Currently, the EU is just a subcontractor of the decisions given by the Democratic Party, which is still ruling in the US. People at the helm of the EU are listening to the guidance of their American bosses and are eager to fulfill everything they are ordered to. Over the past 4 years, the EU has been going towards self-destruction. Thanks to the new administration in Washington, D.C., that will be busy sorting out American problems rather than exporting democracy, Europe has the opportunity to opt for a completely different kind of policy. It will defend its own interests, and it will cater for its own interests, and it will be able to become again a key actor in global policy.
McAllister, please, for 1 minute and 30.
Madam President, dear Vice President, High Representative, dear colleagues, for decades, the Transatlantic Alliance has been the cornerstone of European security, and that means also of European freedom. The United States is a rock-solid NATO ally. The United States is by far our most important international trading partner. That's why it is in our key interest to develop further the transatlantic bond between the United States of America, Canada on the one hand, and the Europeans on the other side of the Atlantic. Europe is equally vital for America, as the Americans cannot face the global challenges alone. I would like to echo what our President Roberta Metsola said after the elections. Our mentality is no longer America elects and Europe reacts, but Europe acts. And indeed, the European Union ought to proactively explore common interests with the next US administration, even though our priorities might often not always align. And as the Vice President High Representative said, we need action on ensuring our own defense and security in Europe. We need action on growing our economies and ensuring our competitiveness. It's action that speaks, not words. This is what we need to do, considering the huge challenges ahead of us. Let us remain transatlantic and in future become more European. This will be the right way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Kathleen Van Brandt.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Chair. Dear colleagues, what a world we live in today. Even before the new term started, the outlook of the Trump administration paints a dark picture. A dark big picture for multilateralism and for international trade, putting hardliners and hawks in key positions, outlining just a single clear message: America first. What better example is there than the choice to appoint Musk, of all people, to be at the helm of a new department for government efficiency, giving Musk the knife to cut and undermine government services where he wants to exploit them privately. It's nothing less, this sort of efficiency is nothing less than privatization, deregulation, and the imposition of checks and balances. That would be an unprecedented concentration of power with tech giants and the private sector in that power and the erosion of democratic control. But I agree with you, Mr. Borrell. Let's not waste time on what we cannot influence, but let's focus on what we can do. Holy.
So we have a blue card.
Yeah.
We have a blue card.
Yes.
Mrs. Jovanovici, please.
Mulțumesc frumos.
Thank you very much. I have listened to your speech, and I wonder whether you think it's democratic what you are doing, namely getting involved in the internal affairs of a different state and to condemn the American people for having elected on a democratic stance, unlike other states where elections are ordered here from the center. So you're condemning the American people for having elected Trump. Us, people from the right who love God, are happy that Trump has been elected, and in God we trust. What do you think of you getting involved in the internal affairs of different countries?
Thank you. Now you have also 30 for the answer, please.
Thank you very much for the answer. I do the opposite, because I think we all agree that the impact of the elections in the United States will be huge when it comes to Europe. And my example of Elon Musk is, I think, a very good example. There's no problem. They can do, of course, and install a department and efficiency. But if you can buy yourself into a job like that, it will have huge impact also on what will happen on AI in the European Union, what will happen on privacy of data in the European Union, what will happen with social media in the European Union. And there we need to be ready. And for that we need a united Europe.
Thank you. The next speaker is Kinga Gál.
Tisztelt kollégák!
Thank you, dear colleagues. Donald Trump achieved a historic victory, and I congratulate him. Finally, we open a new chapter in transatlantic relations, and there is a chance to finish this war in our neighborhood as soon as possible and sign a ceasefire to see peace. It's high time that Europe does more for its own security and in order to increase its global weight. Now, there's a good fundament for this, the competitiveness pact that we adopted last week in Budapest. In June, in Europe, people voted for change. They voted for change in the United States. People said no to liberal elitist policies, and parties who are against illegal migration and support families have won. And now we see common sense winning over woke craziness in the United States as well. Anybody who's supporting freedom can see good news from the United States. Now they are making America great again. It is our job to make Europe great again. Patriots are ready.
Speaker is Arkadiusz Mularczyk.
Dziękuję bardzo, panie komisarzu.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, President. American society gave a mandate to President Donald Trump and wants him to be the new leader of the US. Our aim as the European Parliament should be just as clear: development and strengthening of our relations with the US. As an MEP, a few days ago I was in Fort Worth in Texas. It was an exchange of information, opinions between American lawmakers and European lawmakers. And all delegations agree we need to develop and cooperate our relationships. It will serve our security and economic development. And I want to say that all political groups were present in our delegation, all political parties, but we were represented mainly by the Central European states. And it's a shame that we didn't have anyone from Germany or France. It is also clear that for Central Europe, for Poland, cooperation with the US is of key importance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Sophie Wilmès.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. L'élection du nouveau président.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The election of the new US-American president has caused enthusiasm in some and disappointment in the majority of our fellow citizens. And luckily, the foundation of EU-US relations is robust enough to carry us through the various stages in history and democratic cycles. That is my profound conviction, all the more so since we have recently returned from our mission to Texas. And I believe that what this election ought to bring about in us is determination. Determination to continue to work with the United States, our long-standing ally, despite our differences, because our common interests have not disappeared, be these economic, technological, in terms of energy or security. We must have determination, too, to finally fully realise and take ownership of our European strategic autonomy. This is because the promises made over the course of the first Trump presidency were not enough to wake us up. As you said, Mr. Borrell, we have a clear roadmap, so let's go for it.
Here is Ignacio Roberto Marino.
President,
as Commissioner Borrell said, the election of Donald Trump must give us rise for reflection. It arrives at a juncture where we are having to think about our own spirit, culture and ethics. We are fragmented and split, confronting the challenges that are those of our time. War, climate change, migratory flows. The war in Ukraine also gives rise to emotions, and we want to see a ceasefire. We can't risk just watching from the sidelines. When Trump, Putin and Elon Musk take the stage, then we have to make sure that we don't become a satellite of great powers. We need to react to this. We must defend the values that we have espoused since the Second World War: peace, justice, social justice, and otherwise we risk destroying the previous generation's work in what they constructed for us.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mark Butanga.
Colleagues, there's a La Fontaine fable that is well known, and I think that La Fontaine was talking about Europe versus the US today. Before Trump, they used their secret services to spy on us. They pushed us to go to war in the Middle East, and that then destroyed one of our neighbouring regions in our continent. And then during the energy crisis, they have very expensive shale gas, and then they're going to use cheaper energy to get our industries over there. Trump has said that there's going to be customs tariffs against our industry. There are going to be algorithms that are going to guide the information we get, and he's now got a minister who's going to try and tell us which judges we should have and which laws we should adopt and repeal. No. Why would we accept that? From which other country would we accept that? People are saying that we need to have closer relations with the US. No, we need to look for alternatives as opposed to just submitting ourselves to these multinationals. We need to think about our public situation here. We're not the only country in the world. They're not the only country in the world.
On our list is Thomas Fröhlich.
Frau Präsidentin.
Madam President, political show trials, abuse of voters, instead of Mr. Trump being sent to prison or in the grave, here he is back in the White House. And this is particularly painful for the left-wing establishment. They laughed at Trump, and now he who last laughs lasts longest. We have a positive result in the American elections because there's going to be peace in the Middle East. Mr. Vance doesn't want other countries to have the finger pointed at by the US. And Mr. Trump doesn't want woke censorship. He wants freedom of expression. Of course, he has to deliver now, otherwise it is no victory. Regardless of the euphoria, we can't necessarily rely on him, but because he's representing American interests, not ours. Our interests are sovereignty, strategic autonomy, good relations to the East and to the West. And that's why we have to have a complete exchange of political staff, because what we have is absolutely disastrous. We need our own Trump. Mr. Orban himself is not enough.
The next speaker is Luis Vicentio Lazaros.
Mulțumesc.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a bit confused. I've noticed that the left and the center have the impression that Americans are idiots, basically. Are Americans idiots? So Americans have elected a leader. I've been to the United States and I've discussed with many Americans. I've spent about 2 months there at the beginning of this year. And what do you know? Most Americans were pro-Trump. Now, what can we do? Not cooperate with Trump? That would be the ultimate thing to do. But we should also consider the fact that this House is 2/3 center and left and 1/3 right wing. Do you know why? Because of the systematic manipulation in mainstream media. That's why. Otherwise, if you look to normal people, if you ask them, then what do you think you'll find out? They are mostly pro-right. So basically this parliament is pretty much fake. In fact, 2/3 should be right-wing and 1/3 should be center-left. If we were to respect the people's will and we would stop manipulating people in EU member states.
Please, Eliana.
Right. Madam President, dear High Representative, last week I spent with few colleagues time with in Republican hospitality in Texas. It was great to see Texas after the day after the elections, the patriotism and the joy from the local people. I think that we forget one thing forever as we are elected by the citizens. Not only Trump was elected, but we had House of Representatives and the Senate being elected. And America is a democracy. We have check and balances. We have to work with congressmen, with senators, and we have to come to our senses and work on the issues, not ideology. And thank you, High Representative, for mentioning strategic compass. We have to work on our defense. We have to work on floods. People were voting Trump because they didn't receive the help when they needed one. So we have to work on issues, otherwise we will be passed as well in this House. And I'm looking forward to European Union coming to senses and coming out of this infantile position, expecting somebody else to save us, and to threaten with a trade war or the war with the words. Accept reality, start working with those with whom we can build the bridges, and I think that we can find common interest and joint interests with Trump, with House and the Senate in the same cause and on the same goals that we need in this geopolitical turbulent world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Brando Benifei.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. The American people have spoken, and as the chair of the delegation who is to report on the trip to the United States, we were working on a strong transatlantic relationship. I came back yesterday after a few days of meetings. We met people in Congress, and there are other colleagues who are here who were there as well. Now, there are many areas where we can work together as opposed to work to divide. But what you can see today is that Elon Musk today is going to be asked by Trump to take responsibility for government department, and he has just attacked the Italian judges. And so we're wondering here how these relationships can work. Trump is talking about trade and international defence, and there are things for concern here. It's time for Europe to unite and to protect and work on its own interests together.
Thank you very much. Harold Wilimski is the next on the list. Thank you very much. What's better than somebody for Donald Trump than to show the left-wing radicals here in the in this chamber to be criticised after they're pointing the fingers at Mr. Orban. So learn from Mr. Trump, left-wing, democracy. There's a clear vote that's been expressed by the people in the US against this whole woke nonsense, against LGBTQ, all forms of wokeness, in fact. They have expressed their votes against multiculturalism, illegal immigration, and the abuse of the right to asylum, something that we're seeing here as being more and more negative. They expressed a vote against globalization, taking jobs. That's the same problem that we're seeing here in Europe. They have expressed their vote against fake news, against the deep state, against the influence of big tech companies. They have expressed their view against politicized judiciary who tried to get Trump out of office. And I think seeing what's happening with Donald Trump in the US and what Mr. Orban is doing here, that's the future, whether you like it or not. The next on our list is Asita Kanko.
Do we want to be honest here about the topic, the American elections and our relations with the US? Until now, Trump has not destroyed Europe. We've done that ourselves. We have seen what just happened in Amsterdam. That's something that we did, and that is because we have chosen multiculturalism time and time again, and we have been suffocating our own situation. We need to think about what government and financial efficiency means. The Americans are doing something. They're taking action. We need to stop speaking down to the American voters and look at ourselves. We need to respect the people there. Why do we forget a few simple facts? People who work must be able to pay their bills. They must be able to walk down the street safely, and they must be able to know that their children are safe and that their prosperity is protected. That is the same ambition for people, whether you're black or white. And the left and some of the press have missed the point. They have looked at the legitimate interests of these people, and they have not paid attention to them, and that is how Trump has won.
Last Wednesday, Europe woke up feeling worried, finding out that the 47th president of the USA would be the same as the 45th president. Since then, we've been through a few different phases. We have been through shock and terror as if we hadn't even imagined the possibility that Trump might be re-elected. Then there was denial amongst those who were trying to convince themselves that Europe had already survived a first Trump term, not understanding that things are very different this time around. And then you have those who think of themselves as mini European Trumps. We've heard from a few of them here today, who are not aware of the risks of a Trump presidency for our citizens. Then you have those who are trying to flatter and please Trump, when actually Europe really should be waking up. For once, Giorgia Meloni and Trump are right. It's up to us now to take our fate in hand if we wish to be the ones to decide for ourselves. It's now for Europe to affirm itself, and if we don't do it now, we'll never do it. Either we're able to sit down around the table of the big boys of geopolitics, or tomorrow we'll be eaten for dinner at that table. The choice is clear. If we don't want to simply sit back and suffer, we must take... The chair interrupts the speaker.
Vidal's the next speaker.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's very important to admit in this chamber that since November 5th, we face an even more complex world. And this is why our response has to be immediate and it has to be actionable. There is no time for Europe to defer those decisions and actions that are so needed now. It is of high importance that we become even clearer in our priorities, but also defending our values. This is why I think it is now the time for Europe to step up even further our support and aid for Ukraine. It is now the time for Europe to invest in our tech sector and to build it in a global, competitive way. It is now for us to cut the red tape in order to unleash our industries, to innovate, to develop, and to be more competitive. Because if President-elect Trump seeks to be transactional with Europe and the world in general, then we will need to deploy our spreadsheet diplomacy, and I hope we'll be ready to do that. This is why, more than ever, we need a strategy where we identify common ground and figure out how to do business done.
Sorry, time is over.
Before,
the next speaker is
Lina
Galvez, please.
Gracias, Presidenta, Vicepresidente.
Thank you, President. Vice President, the results of the US election are facing us with a major challenge as Europeans. Despite our close partnership with the United States, the new US-American administration may have a great impact on trade, multilateralism, and the resilience of the principles and institutions which are the foundation of our liberal democracies and the equality between men and women. This may seem negative, but it may actually be the wake-up call that Europe requires to try and increase our political and economic cooperation so that we can finally step up and be that global political player. But that will only be possible if the pro-European and pro-democratic forces in this House unite. And thinking about what we heard yesterday from the European People's Party yesterday with the hearing for Commissioner-designate Ribera, we're certainly not anywhere close to achieving that. Thank you.
Klára Dostálová.
Kolegyně, kolegové, za oceánem voliči
Ladies and gentlemen, on the other side of the Atlantic, the world has been shown what real democracy is. A leader who's been elected, who can listen and who's not just happy with sound bites. They've elected a man who speaks with them, not about them. And what does the EU do? Well, they're demonising those who are asking for change. They're building walls against opinions that differ from their own. That's not democracy. That's a Game of Thrones. Europe is the cradle of democracy. When did Europe become an area where you must comply? So I think you should do what's right. Secondly, you should listen. Thirdly, you shouldn't give people a stamp of being degenerate if they don't think the same way you do. People are free to have their own opinions. That's the principle of democracy. And if Europe isn't aware of that, it's not a Europe of the citizens.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. High Representative, colleagues. Despite what the left is saying and the globalist mainstream, Donald Trump won beyond all forecasts. It was the common sense of the people in America who want more safety and less taxes, less irregular migration and more national pride. And this is a result that needs to be accepted, even if it's something the left doesn't like. In the past, Trump was seen as a monster, but now it's an issue of the tariffs. Trump is looking at the interests of the Americans, and we need to think about the interests of the Europeans as well. Now, we do need to make our voice heard as well, but there's only one way that we can do this. We need to make our companies more competitive. We need to cut energy costs. We need to support our farmers. We need to launch the automotive industry. We need to make sure that we have high-quality products and reduce the bills. We need to think about this green transition, which moves us to electricity, but then that means that we're going to be involved in the transatlantic relationship. But we've been looking at a relationship with China. But what we need to have is this emissions issue. All of the energy available needs to be used for these purposes. Europe, we've had Biden and Kamala Harris, but we cannot lose any more time now. We need to catch up.
The next speaker is Hilde Woutmans.
Colleagues, Europe always had a love-hate relationship with the United States. Under Biden, there was a lot of love on defense, on Ukraine, and a lot of hate and irritation on trade because of our European trade surplus. Under Trump, we need to enforce this. We need a fundamental shift. Trump is like a godfather, so let's make him an offer he cannot refuse. We need to tell him we don't need your American love on defense. We will do our own homework. Europe must stand on its own military legs. And on trade, we need the opposite. We have to say, stop the hate. We are not your enemy. Europe is your biggest trade ally. Let's form a trade bloc against China and other autocracies. Colleagues, let's stop analyzing Trump. He's a man of action. Let's show him a Europe of action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Woutmans. The next speaker is Daniel Caspary.
Sehr geehrte Kolleginnen und
Colleagues, today we have been talking a lot about the new US president and the impact that the elections are going to have on us in Europe, potentially. But I really would like us to think more about what we need to do. What is our homework? What is the homework that we have to do? Well, it is independent of the question as to who is going to be the president of the US, because we have the key challenge of making sure we have more security, better defence in the EU and the member states and in NATO. These are the things that we need to do regardless of what else is happening. We need to look at the context around us. What about our economy? We need to think about our companies and the SMEs and so on. We need to free them up. They need to be able to develop. That would be another contribution that we can make if we want to be more competitive here in Europe. And then that means we would be still an interesting partner for the USA. Thank you very much, Caspary. The next speaker is Tonino Piccola.
Thank you, Madam President. High Representative, dear colleagues, the election of Donald Trump most probably will have enormous repercussions. It will not affect only EU-US relations, but it will also define what we want from our Europe. It will face us with many challenges, from economic, trade, military and defence-wise. That's why we need to be more prepared than we were 8 years ago when Trump Part 1 happened. It's important to monitor whether the new American president will try to translate his harsh rhetoric and announcements of radical moves into the content of his new mandate. The dilemma remains how to cooperate with an administration so preoccupied with dismantling multilateral order while the European Union is the most remarkable multilateral community. Let's stay united, just as we were when Brexit took place, when we showed that remaining united is our biggest strength. That's something we have to repeat once again if needed. Thank you.
Dankeschön.
Thank you.
Wir haben eine Blue Card.
We've got a blue card.
Excuse me, Tonino, we have a blue card by colleague Roncha. Do you accept it? Yes, please.
Thank you. I will speak Polish. Jako socjalista.
As a socialist,
Yes, please.
Thank you. Jak na socjalista.
As a
a socialist, I think you presented quite a rational approach in the discussion with the US and towards Donald Trump. You heard that Donald Trump said that he will build nuclear energy, he will look for gas and coal, he will frack. And now the question, our commissioner candidate says we will stick to ETS2, we will introduce new taxes. So European energy will be more and more expensive while American energy will be cheaper and cheaper. So how should companies function? Because we know that European companies are already fleeing to the US.
Of course, thank you for the question. Reality facts shows that US and EU economy combined matters 40% of world GDP. I don't think that President Trump will do anything which might hurt American business interests. So I do hope, and I believe that there will be a rational approach towards the European Union, that it will not be very harsh in planning and moving his next moves. If you don't know, I would like to remind you that unfortunately we did not succeed to settle some disputes with the Biden administration, and we got only truce until the March of the next year. So we in Washington got approximately half a year, at least to avoid open trade war. But nevertheless, European Union must be ready for different course of action.
Vielen Dank. Nächster Redner ist
Thank you. Now, Mr. Turch.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. So much fear, so much hatred towards Trump, and so many American people who turned out en masse to vote for him. I think we ought to be a little more respectful. But fear is really what it's about here. The elections in June were already cause of a great fear. It was really the end of that fallacy of that great party in the middle, the end of that paralyzing pact for the European House. And what's more, the EPP decided to hang on to all of the losers to try and cling to that vision of the major mainstream parties. And now you're all panicking because Donald Trump has done it. Your worst nightmare, your big enemy. The American people have given Trump huge power to reconquer prosperity, security and freedom in the US, which is exactly what we are being denied here in Europe. We're getting poorer every day and less free every day. It ought to be the end of hatred and envy, which is at the heart of the socialist ideology, which you all share here. The mainstream majority is losing steam more and more all the time. And now you're all afraid. You're all afraid because you are now part of the past.
The next speaker is Mr. Vondra.
The decisive victory of Donald Trump is a reality. And with a majority on the Hill, he will restore the strong leadership in the White House. So what we should do? Firstly, we must invest much more into our security and defense to gain the respect in Washington to keep NATO alive. Secondly, with Trump's departure from the Paris Treaty, we must prefer realism over the green ideology and correct the Green Deal to get our economies back on track. And thirdly, a real problem is Trump's mercantilism. Therefore, enormous responsibility would be on the new European Commission. It must engage immediately with Washington to avoid the escalation into trade wars that would seriously harm our businesses. Here are 3 keys to a new transatlantic agenda. Let's not screw this up again.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Kelleher.
EU-US relations will change with a Trump victory and into the White House and also control of Congress. But we should not react in an emotional or irrational way to a democratic process. We have to acknowledge what has happened in the United States and deal with it accordingly. Our Transatlantic alliance is a very old alliance. US troops have twice come to this continent to liberate us from fascism and from other forms of autocracy. But at the same time, we also have to realise that trade is a significant issue on which Donald Trump, as president, will renegotiate. And I would be concerned that we haven't the capacity in Europe to sit down and work out what is in the interests of the old alliance with regard to trade. We can't just pretend there will be no changes. Yes, there will. But equally, we must not just accept that we are into a cycle of trade tariffs, aggressive tax planning and other areas that undermine the institutions and the efficiencies of industry in both Europe and also in the US. So I believe with rational thought, with dialogue and discussions, that we can come to an arrangement with an ally that is critically important both for Europe and the United States in terms of our economies and our competitiveness.
Thank you,
Sheva, please.
Mr. Vice President Borrell and dear colleagues, as the new standing rapporteur on the United States for the Foreign Affairs Committee, and in the light of the outcome of the American election, I think there are a few things we need to keep in mind. First, we must maintain our strategic partnership with the United States. NATO is a key guarantor, and Article 5 cannot be questioned by anyone. This is what the NATO alliance is all about. But we must remember, especially in this House of Democracy, we are the EU. We are a political union and we cannot be divided. We must demand to be respected in this transatlantic relationship. This is what a true relationship should look like. The first test of this should be Ukraine and our shared commitment to supporting it until victory is achieved. We must finish the job before 20th of January. No more red lines for Ukraine using Western weapons. And both the United States and European countries must speed up the delivery of weapons that Ukraine desperately needs. We are ready to stand the course. We are ready to cooperate with the new elected US officials. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Nächster Redner ist der Kollege.
Thank you, Mr. Glucksmann.
Merci.
Thank you very much. High Representative, ladies and gentlemen, let's not be ostriches. Putin's not going to invade Ukraine, and then he does. Trump was just a one-off. Now here he is back stronger than ever. And now we're going to hear, no, but Trump's not going to do what he said he'll do. No, he will. Don't trick yourselves. He will, and we need to prepare ourselves. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to need to prepare ourselves because Trump is preparing to stop support for Ukraine. If he does that, we're prepared to double or triple our support to Ukraine. Even though the German Secret Service is saying that there could be a probable invasion of Russia before 2029 that could be an EU country. So let's say quite clearly, no, we're not ready because we haven't done what we should have done. Because North Korea by itself has provided 9 million rounds of munition to Russia, and we can hardly muster a third of that in 3 years to Ukraine. So at a time of imbalance, it's up to us to come out of this crisis as a stronger, sovereign European power in a position to cover its own security.
Thank you. Next, Andrea Correa.
Senhora Presidente, Senhor Comissário.
President, Commissioner, colleagues, I must say that I am simply speechless in the face of the ignorance of this House, a house of democracy, when you say that Trump's election basically spells the end of the world, that Trump is bad, that he's evil, and that's just wrong. Trump's election actually is a good thing for the West, and here in Europe, we need to face that. It's not by systematically working against Trump that we'll improve Europe. There must be a dialogue with the US-American administration, ensuring that our interests prevail. And so In this way, we will be able to triumph. We'll have less wokeism, our societies won't be destroyed, there'll be more protection for our children. It's not with war that we will win out. It's not via conflict that we'll be able to get our ideas to prevail. We must, on the contrary, cooperate and negotiate.
The next speaker is Madame Trochu. Thank you, President. Colleagues, the election of Donald Trump, far from being the disaster presented by the Western media, must be something for EU that is the end of naivety. We need to end this naivety where you believe that you have trade is going to help the world. American protectionism is something that requires EU and national measures so that we can free our economies and protect our companies. Then military power. The US is not going to play the global policeman anymore, and we also need to think about the French nuclear power, for example. It needs to take up its autonomy again when it comes to defensity. We also need to end ideological naivety as well when it comes to looking at mass migration, LGBT ideology and trans ideology. We need to learn from this as a lesson, as opposed to going further with a kind of progressiveness that is destructive. The left has been talking about this. We all need to finally live up to reality. Thank you very much, Mr. Gebrandi.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioner, dear colleagues. Trump does not believe that by cooperation both sides can benefit. He considers the world a zero-sum game. But we know that not all political leaders in the US think like Trump. There are many internationally oriented governors and mayors with whom we should strengthen our ties. However, in order to show Trump our strength, we need to communicate clearly to him our red lines. And Trump is threatening to roll back all US climate policy, and that is, for me, a red line. We need to make very clear that every step Trump takes to undermine the world's climate goals is met with a strong EU reaction. We will not have our market flooded with US products that were made with complete disregard for the climate. And I call on the European Commission to propose emergency measures to protect international climate policy. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Mr. Millamont.
Yes, Presidenta.
Thank you, President. The US is our most important strategic partner. We have a long-standing and deep relationship. We share values, and our economies are increasingly integrated. And we must continue along that road despite the political changes that we see. We are facing huge geopolitical challenges. The war in China becoming more and more combative, the threat in the Middle East, the threat of climate change, drug trafficking. All of this means that EU-US relations are still key. We shouldn't be here trying to feed into our differences. Rather than trade wars, we ought to take a positive approach. For instance, we ought to have a Trade and Technology Council. We ought to have summits, perhaps annual summits, to ensure that we can coordinate events and action at the highest level. Let me finish by saying that together we're stronger, and the international context requires this. Europe, too, needs to be more proactive. For instance, we ought to have a robust defence industry, and we need to continue providing aid to Ukraine. What's more, the US, President-elect Trump, must understand that by working together, we will be able to increase well-being and wealth on both sides of the Atlantic. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Schaldemose. Thank you, President. The USA is the most important ally for Europe. That was the case before the elections, and it still is the case now. But there is a but. Our world is changing. There are global challenges, there are wars, there's climate change and poverty. Something needs to happen, and someone needs to respond. And we can do that best if we work together at international level. In the EU, Well, we need to think about the climate change. We need to think about supporting Ukraine. We need to continue addressing these challenges, even though there's a new resident in the White House. We need to cooperate. We need to cooperate with countries that are based on democracy and the rule of law, and cooperation with the US must continue. We need to do more in the EU. We're going to have to take on more responsibility for our own security. We're also going to need to work together with the US, and it's only then will we be able to solve the international challenges such as war and poverty. We'll do that together.
Van den Dries.
Now, Mr. Van den Driesche.
President, ladies and gentlemen, the American people have elected and won. The huge vote for Donald Trump is a historic victory of the people over the elite. It is the victory of nationalism over globalism. The Americans have taken their country back. We, however, are no Americans. We're Flemish, we're European. Our interests are not by definition concurrent with theirs. We also have to choose for policies of common sense. Let's stop with this climate nonsense of the Green Deal that is destroying our purchasing power and choose for climate realism. Let's stop with a policy of open borders that leads to a lack of security and safety and depopulation, and let us take those illegal immigrants and send them back. Let us not censure on social media. Let us restore our civic and fundamental rights. People have to be put at the top of the agenda. Make Europe great again. Thank you.
Thank you. Nächster Redner ist der Kollege Storm.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Storm.
Tak for det, fru formand. Jeg vil starte med at ønske Trump tillykke med hans
Thank you, President. Well, congratulations to Trump for that incredible victory, even conquering many of the swing states. Trump's victory is an opportunity for Europe to wake up. We need to make sure that we're taking care of our own security. We need to stand on our own 2 feet, and we can only do that if we start to take ourselves seriously. We must invest in better military infrastructure and better equipment for our soldiers. Recently, it's been so scarce as to be embarrassing. We need to make sure, too, that we're pumping the right kind of funding into our militaries. To finish up, I would like to call to politicians on both sides of the Atlantic to seek good cooperation over the next few years. Trade ties are a positive thing. They're the right pathway forward for the future, making us freer. And we need to make sure that we keep this positive mutual action alive.
Thank you, Madam President. Citim și auzim zilele acestea.
So we're reading in the press and we're hearing that Trump's victory is a wake-up call for Europe. Both supporters and opponents are saying this, but very few are saying that Europe did not need Trump or anyone else by that matter in order to wake up. Competitiveness, security, industry, and technology in Europe, well, these are sectors that need to be developed regardless of who is in the White House. And the partnership with the US will last because there's no reasonable alternative. It might be more difficult. That's for us to see, and we will adjust, and so will our partners in Washington. This is not the end of the world, and this is not the beginning of any illuminated era. This is just a path that the EU needed to take anyway. We just have to be a stronger, more robust, more united partner in order to prosper, for our citizens to prosper, but in order to help Ukraine, Moldova, Western Balkans, and all our partners. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Als nächstes spricht der
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Morrison.
Vielen Dank, Frau Präsidentin. Dear colleagues, the United States of America are our most important partner and ally when it comes to security, to defense, to the economy, but also to politics. The United States of America and the European Union have together defended democracy for many decades. We have together defended the rule of law, and we expect to do this together. We expect the United States of America continue to be a model when it comes to rule of of law in the United States of America, but also worldwide. On security and defense, we are aware that we will have to do more ourselves. We will have high representative commissioners. We will have to convince the member states that doing more in the area of security and defense at European level is better than member states individually doing things nationally. Spending €1 more on security, on defense at European level brings more benefits to member states than spending many euros separately, 27 euros by 27 member states, 27 member states individually. We will never turn our backs to the United States of America, but should the United States of America turn their backs on us, we have to be ready, we have to be stronger. Our answer needs to be continuing the integration at European level and trying to prevent the United States turning their backs on us by identifying areas where we can continue with them also in the future in the interest of the US and in the interest of the European Union. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Ms. Tomedo.
Senhora Presidente, Senhor Alto Comissário.
President, High Representative, the agenda that we have for a future Trump government is going to have an impact for Europe. There is the climate change ahead of us, and if the US withdraw from an agreement, then the efforts to achieve climate neutrality will be impacted. Then there's also a threat to multilateralism as well. In the past, the US have looked at different international organizations and withdrawn from them, the WTO, for example, and then also the WHO during the pandemic. Then there's a threat to the peace in the world. We've heard what Trump has said about solving conflicts. There will not be solutions, for example, in the Middle East because they're not respecting the wills of the different parties. There could also be a trade war with geopolitical dimensions as well. The outcome of the US election is, of course, something that we respect, but it's also a warning for us because now, more than ever before, we need to think about autonomy. We need new social policies. And we can't just have a simple solution. That is the outcome. The next speaker is Mr. Borchia.
We need to note that people on the left seem to be down in the dumps. Well, maybe you can take some good drugs, or maybe you can choose to get out of your corner and stop talking about decarbonisation, talk about jobs instead. Or maybe, you can talk about civil rights, seeing that social rights aren't working. We see that Washington is not giving up the working classes. We're seeing that here everybody's being offered up on the altar of wokeism. We're seeing that America First has made headway, even though it came from the Democrats in recent years. But the overwhelming majority of this parliament has been wrong, first of all, by defending America's stance on not taking energy from Russia, as we haven't done either. The wind has changed in Washington, and now it's time for it to happen in Brussels.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Gerdi.
Τόσο οι αμερικανικές εκλογές, όπως και οι πρόσφατες ευρωεκλογές.
The recent US and EU elections have sent a message. There has been a message that has rung out from the west of the United States to Eastern Europe. Everywhere, citizens are calling for their religion, their identity to be respected. They're calling for migration to be controlled. They're calling for safety and security everywhere. They're calling for an end to wokeism. And they're calling for families to be respected. Mother, father, woman, man. We're going to have to be realistic when it comes to the climate. We are going to have to go back to true freedom of speech, even if this is not pleasing to the left. We must place our nations above all else. Make Europe great again.
Gala.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Gala.
Frau Präsidentin.
President, colleagues, America has had its elections. We recognise the results. The country is still an unmissable partner for us in the EU, especially when it comes to security and defence and when it comes to the extension of authoritarian regimes. And we also need to think about the trade relations with this important partner. We need to step them up as well. We need to talk to both of the houses and the administration, and when we do that we need to make it clear that the development and strengthening of this relationship is in the interest of the Americans as well. We also need to have contacts in the different federal states as well, especially where you have European investments and where on the ground you can see that they are benefiting from European exports. We need to show that we are attractive partners. We're not just people who need help as we might have needed in the past. We need to offer to have sufficient defence budgets. We also need to think about reducing the tariffs on cars and not having more. And if we want to have more LNG from America and not unlabelled gas from Russia, then it is in the Americans and our interest.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Vistisen. Well, one thing is clear when you listen to the speeches in the chamber. The biggest fans for Trump are not in the USA. He's here, not on the right, but America's decided on a new line to have less immigration, etc. But all of those who fear what's going to happen, you've really missed Trump, haven't you? And you've wanted to get more power for the EU, and now the final vestiges of foreign policy and external policy should be accrued in Brussels. And that's why Trump has become your object of hate. Because without Trump and the media hype against Trump, we know that you would never get any public support for these competences to be shifted to Brussels. But we don't want bureaucracy that Brussels is foisting on us. And so we need to choose parties who see the electorate as the important people in this equation. Mr. Bugalho.
Yes, maybe I didn't pronounce it right. I'm sorry.
Madam President, High Representative, há 83 anos, em plena Segunda Guerra, o Primeiro-Ministro...
83 years ago, there was a meeting between European and US leaders, and everything was done to ensure that countries that had been through World War II could get back to their freedom. And that is the spirit in which we must act now. We need peace, peace for our children. And Putin's peace will only be the possibility of a new war. Europe is still Europe, even if the US becomes a little less European, but we must stick to our principles. What we have to do because of Trump will have to be done after him, and if we do not work to improve our security and defence union, is that we will not be able to go on. Our economic priority must be peace, not a Russian peace, and we mustn't wait for the US president to understand that before us.
Kollege Buczek.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Buczek.
Pani Przewodnicząca, Szanowni Państwo.
President, ladies and gentlemen, European mainstream has been looking at Donald Trump with contempt, using insinuations and lies about him. But democracy in the US is doing well, and we in the EU can only envy this. They are today enjoying a true freedom, while we are fighting with more and more authoritarian government of the EU elites. The triumph of Trump can be a good moment of truth and hope for changes that we need in order not to become a third league entity, because right now we are a museum of bad ideas and damaging policies, which make our industry not competitive. The world is not following Europe. It pities us, and we need to change it. And I believe that common sense will win also in Europe. Also in Europe, the time of patriots is coming.
That brings the speakers list to a close, and we move on to Catch the Eye. There are more than 20 requests for Catch the Eye. We are quite late already, so we won't be able to take all of them. We're going to take about 12 or so, obviously according with the strength of the group. Mr. Jonsky is the first.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be speaking Polish. Wyniki wyborów.
The results of the elections in the US show us one thing. Europe cannot wait to see who will be in power in the US, whether in a few weeks, in 4 years, or in 20 years. Just like in the case of its economy, also Europe needs to take care of its security. And this is what the Europeans expect from us. I don't want to judge today which promises Trump will keep and which he will not keep. But we just need to be responsible for Europe's security. And I am glad that now, when the US was giving the primary results, we in this building, we were listening to our commissioners. We had a hearing of the first commissioner for defense, and I'm glad that this is a politician from Lithuania who knows very well Eastern policies, because the issue of security is the most important issue for Europeans now.
The next speaker is Mr. López Aguilar.
Gracias, Presidenta. Alto representante Borrell, a usted la metáfora.
Madam President, Mr. Borrell, it's not enough to sound the alarm for Europe now. If the fire is raging in the House, it means that we need to get out of that House and do things differently. And Trump's presidency poses two enormous challenges to the EU. We want to make sure that the Middle East, Iran, Taiwan, Russia, all of that must be kept under control. But there's an even more imminent threat affecting the very idea of European democracy. Addictive algorithms in the hands of far-right magnates are a big problem, making it impossible to distinguish the truth from lies. And this is a serious threat to the democratic process in the EU. So it's time for the EU to wake up, to grow up, to run out of that burning house and to shoulder our responsibilities. That's what being an adult is.
Thank you. Miss Sardoni is the next speaker, and then Ms. Tunkinen after that. Thank you. I'm here at the back. Trump didn't win. It was a landslide. And all of those on the left who are worried about what's happened recently, I can assure you that Malox in Italy has run out because all the communists are running around with bad stomachs. And so, you know, here we are discussing relations between Europe and the US. It's a shame because we did have the hearings with Ms. Ribera, who wants to be Executive Vice President of the Commission. Yeah, we heard some fantastic words about Trump, a bit like somebody who's illiterate, you know, casting the foundations for good relations and good communications between various institutions. So, but, you know, you've lost. Kamala's lost. The Democrats have lost. Your politics have lost on immigration, on the environment, on getting closer to China, etc. But you're sticking to your guns. So stop. The victory of Trump is not a defeat. Even if you see it as a nightmare, it constitutes a massive opportunity. Thank you. Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Tunkinen, and then Ms. Neumann is after him.
Madam President, President Trump was once again elected, and he wants to make America great again. Because of our lousy politicians, Europe has managed to put itself in a situation where our supply of energy was at the mercy of Russia. Our supply of goods is at the mercy of China. Our population growth is at the mercy of Africa. And our defense is at the mercy of the USA. So should we choose the next new motto for Europe to be, make Europe great again? Yes. Now it's our turn. Whether you like this motto or not, you have to start living according to it. The time of weak men is over. Let's make our energy, goods, babies, and weapons ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Neumann's next, and then Ms. Tröser.
If I ever hear again that we have to be careful that mediocre women don't rise too high, I will only say Donald Trump. This man is not merely mediocre, he's a misogynist, a racist, and a convicted criminal. His behavior and his policies are nothing short of a declaration on war as a war on women, and he seeks alliances with right-wing men around the world, even here in Europe, in this parliament, even in my home country, in Germany. And what I expect from a president of the Commission in such a moment is not congratulations. We should take note and then commit to strengthening women's rights in Europe and to standing with our sisters in the US. We might have to cooperate with Trump, yes, but it's not our job to stroke his ego. We are here to ensure that Europe becomes more independent day by day, and that in 4 years, at least Europe is still the land of the free.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tröser. And then Ms. Kalina is next.
Sehr geehrten Kollegen, ein Kommunist.
Colleagues, a communist in this chamber has tried to denounce me recently because of what I have been wearing. And I want to say, yes, I was pleased about Donald Trump's win. Yes, I was pleased for the Americans that they now have elected Trump as a new leader. And yes, Trump represents the interests of his country. And that is something that the European people can take as an example. America under Donald Trump is still representing fundamental rights and democracy. And I would like us to not only be pleased about his win, because he is our most important ally. And there has been a communist who's been trying to denounce me here, and I was just wanting to say that he is some sort of scandal here. He should go to Cuba or North Korea instead. Those are the countries that represent his values. Thank you.
The next speaker is Kolignac, and then Ms. Soko after.
Thank you so much. In the US, a patriot won and not the globalist system. So I'm happy about this, even though for Europe, of course, economically speaking, this will not be an easy period. But it's not his fault. It's the fault of who is sitting against or opposite him at the table representing European interests. So we're now talking about Draghi's report on how uncompetitive we are. If the president of the Commission says that, if we have energy prices which are 4 times higher than in the US, that that European companies have to fight with. She says, never mind, let's no longer use Russian gas. She's criticizing India for buying Russian gas after the conflict, but she doesn't say that the import of Indian gas to Germany has grown by 1,100%. Yes, you heard that right. Last year, Germany multiplied the import of gas from India, which we all pretend is not Russian gas, and we're talking about whether Russia is not a high-risk country. Until when are we going to be talking about these other countries instead of protecting our own European interests? Thank you.
Kollege Sokol, bereit machen kann sich die Kollegin Tovalieri.
Thank you, Ms. Sovko.
Donald Trump je pobjedio I to je odlična stvar. Njegova pobjeda pokazuje da je krajnji čas.
Thank you very much. We see that this is finally the time for Europe to wake up. In a more and more unstable world where huge changes are afoot, it's illusory to imagine that somebody else is going to look after us. Europe is going to have to pursue its own interests, geopolitically, military, and all other sectors as well. We have to invest more in the military industries. It's outrageous that Russia is producing more grenades a month than we produce in the EU in a whole year. And we shouldn't be dependent on third countries, certainly not those who are selling their wares at prices that undermine European prices. We need to make sure that we focus on the sectors which we believe to be important, where the European Union can be competitive. Thank you.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much. Ms. Tovaglieri, and then Ms. Piperinen.
Settimana scorsa, quando sono entrata.
Last week, when I entered the Parliament, it was like being at a funeral, long faces everywhere. And all of this just because the American people made a democratic choice for Trump. However, today, in this House, I feel like democracy is a one-way street for the European left. You love it when your friends win, but you say that democracy is in peril when you lose. As for me, today, I feel happy and I feel safer with a leader like Trump, who is willing to protect the West, someone who's interested in peace. Let's put a stop to politically correct woke green ideology. All of this is bringing Europe down. Now it's up to us. Let's make Europe great again. Thank you.
Jetzt kommen wir.
Ms. Pipere, and then the final Catch the Eye colleague will be Mr. Saudargas. I'd ask everybody who haven't had an opportunity to speak on this occasion to respect that. Go ahead.
The elections in the United States showed that reality is beyond ideology. They didn't want to fall even deeper into the hole that the bureaucratic establishment was putting them into. The European Union should learn something from this. The European Green Deal is an ideology that is parallel to reality, and it is dangerous for member states. Nobody should be left behind, but this principle is not considered, and it should be rethought. Maybe it should be even abolished. We need to protect individual rights, and we should not censor the freedom of expression. These are characteristics of totalitarianism. The elections in the United States showed that power belongs to the people and not to mass media or to global corporations. The people changes the elites when it is aggressed and lied to. The people do not want to die, and with its elites, the EU is going to fall as Constantinople did.
Thank you very much. The last speaker will be Mr. Saudargas.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, Donald Trump won the elections. So, should we Europeans feel lost in despair, cornered, and let Viktor Orban do the talking? Are we going to watch with gloomy faces Orban and Robert Fico popping the champagne? Please, the United States is a democratic country and has been our strongest transatlantic ally for decades. We have always stood together against tyrants. Trump is starting the tariff war against China. Europe is facing the same problem with electric cars, batteries and solar modules from China as well. But why should this tariff war spread between everyone in the world? Maybe we should proactively propose an economical alliance for the United States in this tariff war. We created an economical alliance in Europe, the European Union. Why not to think of a real transatlantic economic alliance, the economical NATO? Thank you.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much. Now, for the Commission, I give the floor to the High Representative, Mr. Borrell.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam President. Honourable members, thank you very much for all those different points of view. I have paid careful attention throughout this long debate. We heard from over 50 speakers, and I think that only yourself and myself, Madam President, have listened to every single speech, obviously, as is fitting for someone in our duty. I don't know that any other member stayed for the entire length of the debate beyond their speaking time. Maybe there were one or two who did. Now, that doesn't mean that this isn't an important debate, and I have the honour of closing this debate. I hope that you will give me a couple extra minutes with your indulgence, as this is no doubt the last time I will address the plenary. We're talking about the United States, but the United States are not the same under Trump as they are under Obama. If you look at Spain, well, Spain is a different country under Franco or under González. You talk of Israel, but it's not the same Israel with Netanyahu or Peres at the helm. They may well be the same states, but they have different governments. And we would do well to talk about governments. At the end of the day, it's true, only in some cases governments represent the interests of their citizens. And this is absolutely the case of the United States under Trump. It was not the case for Spain under Franco, but it is the case for the United States of America under Trump. US Americans have chosen, and they've chosen Trump as they chose him before. They've chosen him again. He's been re-elected, and we are facing a situation which is not the end of the world, no doubt about it, but it is the beginning of a different world to what it might have been had the Americans made a different choice. And we don't know how Mr. Trump will act, but we can venture to say that he's not going to be increasing military to Ukraine. I think you can agree on that. On the contrary, no likely he'll be dismantling that aid. It is reasonable to think that he will be decreasing, indeed perhaps drastically decreasing that aid. I think it's more reasonable to think that than the contrary of that. And this places us in a position where we must shoulder a responsibility. We have said to a country that we will help them to protect themselves against the aggressor. And I know that there are different viewpoints on that. But history will judge us. It will judge us on whether we helped Ukraine protect itself or whether we let Ukraine fall. We could think that Trump will avoid the colonization of the West Bank. I think that it's reasonable to say that, on the contrary, Trump will be boosting that colonization. Can we say that he will be containing the brutal, disproportionate reaction against Palestinians? No, we can't think that he'll be containing that. Quite the contrary. We could think that he will be facilitating lies not being used to win elections? No, judging by experience. We could hope that he's going to be fighting climate change, or not. Quite the opposite. As some of you have said, he might think that it's a purely ideological problem. We could think that he is going to be ensuring the security of Europeans. Question mark. Question mark. Can you really swear that the security of Europeans is going to be protected and absolutely safe under NATO with a president like Trump? Is he going to be guaranteeing the freedom of Ukrainians? Or, on the contrary, is he going to be sitting down to dinner with Putin with Ukraine on the menu? I think that that's the way it's going to go. And all of that has to be taken into account. This has been a very interesting debate, and all of you have called for action. Action. But what kind of action do you mean? Perhaps not the same kind of action. And in some cases, well, yes, I would agree on the kind of action that you're calling for, and I would disagree on different types of action that others have talked about. I would like to see the continuation of the action that we started on a few years ago. For instance, increased and more swift implementation of the strategic compass, which is an opportunity for us to develop our strategic autonomy. That doesn't mean that NATO isn't going to be the final bulwark of our security. That will continue to be the case as long as the US president wants it to be so. I would like to see us continuing to work to increase, to boost our military capacity. Because Europe is not just an economic union, it's a political one, and we have a responsibility in terms of our defence. It's not just about producing weapons, munitions. It is about that also, but it's not just about that. And we cannot subcontract our security indefinitely. We need to accept our historical and strategic responsibility. I think that that's what Europeans should do. I think that that's what we've got to do in the face of President-elect Trump. And it's not always a question mark when it comes to him. Some of you think that what he's talking about is excellent. Others are worried about what he's going to do. And I would say that I'm somewhere among those who are worried about what Trump is going to do. Worried about a trade war, about mass deportations of immigrants, about abandoning Ukraine, about continuing to sacrifice the rights of Palestinians, about the worries of an upcoming conflict. It's not the end of the world, but it is the beginning of a different world. The people of America have made their choice, and we need to respond to them as part of that. Our relations with the United States, with the people of America, with their economy, our trade ties are colossal, and the jobs of millions of Europeans depend on our trade ties with the US. Our prosperity is linked to US prosperity, and our fight for democracy too. That is why, Madam President, honourable members, I have been delighted to take part in this debate. I would like to thank you for your attention. I would like to thank you for the criticism too that I've received over the past 5 years. And I hope that you will continue to work for a Europe that is stronger, more united, and which has what it takes to live up to the challenges that we face in the world today.
Thank you very much. That brings this debate to a close. Next item on our agenda is an oral question to the Council and the Commission on the 2024 Climate Change Conference in Baku. I'd like to welcome representatives from the Council. I'm just waiting for the Commissioners to switch places.
Kommissar Fuchs,